January 2nd, 2025? Are there not supposed to be flying cars by now? How are we in 2025? Welcome to the Carlos Whittaker podcast. So glad you guys are here. My name's Carlos Enrique Whittaker Guzman Chibol Cabello, or Los for short. And welcome to a new year. Welcome to a new focus. It is January 2nd. How many of you have already failed at your New Year's resolutions? Raising hand. Actually, I don't make New Year's resolutions. I wait until the end of the first week of January to decide that I want to change some things. I can't remember the percentage of how many people fail, but most people fail at New Year's resolutions. So I'm like, let's not do New Year's resolutions. Let's do like second month of the New Year resolutions. And yeah, I'm excited about that. You guys are actually going to, at some point soon, actually by the release of next week's episode, know about something that I am launching for you. Ooh, a little tease here. I am creating something that I can legitimately say will absolutely change your life. Wow. Did I just say that? I did. Most of you, I'd say 90% of you, 10% of you don't have the problem that I'm going to be addressing. 90% of you do. So look forward to that, ladies and gentlemen, please. That's going to be fun. You know, this year on the podcast, I am, and I've talked about this before, wanting to focus more on your stories of just humanity. I want to brew curiosity. And you've heard me say curiosity leads to empathy. Empathy leads to relationship. Relationship leads to trust. Trust leads to change. And actually, when I say that, I'm still trying to figure out which one I think should be flipped. Curiosity leads to empathy is true, but then empathy leads to trust or relationship first. I think relationship. Then relationship leads to trust, right? Or does it lead to trust first and trust leads to relationship? Yeah, I think it could be interchangeable. But for the sake of today, curiosity leads to empathy. Empathy leads to relationship. Relationship leads to trust. Trust leads to change. And I'm just trying to build the curiosity piece. You know, I think there's a lot of people that can build all the other pieces of that funnel that I just kind of created. But I want this podcast to be the curiosity piece. There's other pieces of my career and content and business that maybe can do the relationship part and the trust part and the change part. But this podcast, let it be the curiosity part, the empathy part. And so here's the deal. You know, I started the end of last year documenting myself on YouTube, and I started by the time this comes out, I'm not quite sure if there'll be another episode, but I think there will be, kind of documenting my midlife life. You know, I had a YouTube channel that was, successful is neither here nor there. But when the kids were, you know, in older adolescents, 10, 11, 12, we had a YouTube channel. A lot of people watched it, and it was fun to document like our crazy family adventures. And then I kind of started thinking to myself, well, my life's not as interesting anymore to post on YouTube because people, you know, I'm not a mommy vlogger. I got grown kids. I got a married kid. But then I realized, well, wait a second. All the rest of us Gen Xers that grew up on YouTube are still here. We haven't kicked it. So why not document the middle of my life, the sandwich generation of my life, the life of taking care and parenting young adults while also parenting my parents and caring for my parents. So I put it out there, and it was, surprisingly successful. So I decided I'm going to do it again and again. And the reason why is because I just feel like we need to make sure we all remember that we're all going to go through this, but also I want people to feel seen. And what I wanted to do today is, and I actually did this maybe 3 years ago, and I haven't done it since. I know many of you love my mom and my dad, and they live across the street from me. My father has dementia. My mom is his caretaker. I help when I can. But my dad can't, he can barely say a sentence, barely says words. definitely can't carry on a conversation. And I made, when he started getting dementia, I made a conscious choice to record an interview with him back when he could still tell stories. And so if you follow me on Instagram, you know where my dad is mentally, where he is with his memory and his cognitive function. And there's just not a lot there. But I happened to record a conversation. I want to say this was in 2019 is what I want to say. I can't remember, but I do know that it was after his dementia diagnosis, and I just wanted to ask him his life story. So what you're about to hear on today's episode is the last fully recorded conversation I had with my father before he wasn't able to have conversations anymore. And I want you to just learn about my dad's life and be curious and see if it leads to any sort of empathy inside of you for those of you that have friends or family that are walking through dementia. So here's a conversation, the last conversation I recorded where my dad had the ability to have conversations. And I hope that you appreciate it as much as I do. It's beautiful. Here you go. Well, I want to welcome Dr. Fermin Agustin Whittaker Archibald, which basically, you're my dad. How's it going, Dad? How are you, Pops?
I'm doing very well. I'm celebrating my 46th wedding anniversary.
Wait, that's today?
Today?
Well, gosh. Well, first of all, tell Mom thanks, or I'll tell her myself. But happy anniversary. 46 years of marriage is no small task. And
Nope.
maybe we can talk about that. Let's just start there. Let's just start there. For those of us that are, married. I mean, I've been married 17 years now. So like people look at me like I've got this thing figured out, but you've been married 46 years. Can you please let me know how you pulled that off?
First of all, you have complete confidence in God.
Oh, let's go.
That if he's a part of your marriage life, he's in complete control.
That's right.
And what I have learned over the years, I'm 76 years old right now. 75.
76. We've got.
I was born in 41. I don't know if it's 75 or 76.
Dad, once you turn 75 years old, you don't have to keep track anymore. You just keep living your best life.
Right. And we've been married now for so many years, and this may sound funny to people, but it's not funny. When I meet with some of the younger pastors and they're saying, "Well, Dr. Whittaker, I don't know what to do," I say, slow down.
Yeah.
Why don't you just take a deep breath and let me teach you 3 words to survive in your marriage.
Oh, please tell me.
Sí, mi amor.
Sí, mi amor. Yes, my love.
Yes, how I survived all these years.
That's how you survive. I love that. I love that.
You want a new dress? Sí, mi amor, we'll take care of that. Whatever. You want to go to Europe for a vacation? I don't argue. Sí, mi amor.
Oh, that's so good. Sí, mi amor. Okay, so if we can if I can just double the amount of time I've been married, then I'm gonna put in the sí, mi amor plan of attack. And everyone listening, podcast listeners, you guys do that as well. Dad, here's the thing. This is really the first main episode of the podcast, and a lot of podcasts out there these days are, they're interviewing these great authors and great speakers. And I think that people that have big platforms, I think that's great. I think that's wonderful. They're wise. But I also feel like there's so much wisdom being left out in the gutters and just kind of on the pathways next to the major intersections of what people would presume would be evangelical Christendom. And your story has always been so fascinating to me. And every time I go and speak, I speak a lot about you. Everyone knows about you. But what I wanted to do is kind of invite you in, because I feel like when you tell me the stories of your faith, there's some pretty wild stories. And when I say wild, again, I'm not talking about crazy. I'm just talking about you having to trust God in a way that is not safe.
Completely.
And so can we rewind maybe back to, because you grew up in Panama, the country of Panama. We're not talking about Panama City Beach, Florida, people. Okay, we're talking about Panama, the country. And And I want you to tell us the story of what I believe is you entering into a wild side of your faith the very first time that you felt the call of the Lord to preach. Can you rewind? What I don't know.
Sure,
What are we
sure.
rewinding 65 years? I don't know when this is, and take us back to that moment in your journey.
And at age 14, I was in the church with my young people's group, and the pastor said to me, "Fermin, you're going to preach next month for Youth Sunday." In our church in Panama, we used to have one Sunday a year where the young people took over the church services.
Okay.
But we never pick up the offering.
Wait, why?
Because they didn't trust us to pick up the offering.
They wouldn't let the young people pick up the offering because you would pocket it.
We could lead the choir, we could teach the classes, but we couldn't pick up an offering.
I love it. That's so good.
And he said to me, he said, "Fermin, you're going to preach next month." And I'm going, "Pastor, I am tongue-tied," which means I couldn't speak well. I missed 3 words out of 5 words. And
wait, so at 14,
14.
You were tongue-tied. What? Tell us a little bit about that.
Tongue-tied is I was a stutterer, stammerer.
Okay.
I could not speak clearly. I had 2 missing front teeth, so when I speak, I whistle. Yeah. And the pastor said, "You're going to preach next month for Youth Sunday." And I said, "Pastor, I don't know how to speak." He said, "Well, that's not my problem, son. It's God's problem."
That's so good.
And on Sunday morning, I practiced all month. I preached to the iguanas, and I preached to the horses in the streets, and
really?
I tried to baptize a cat.
Yeah.
My mom told me if you're going to be a pastor, you got to baptize people. I said, "But this is a cat." Anyway, make a long story short.
No. We don't want a long story short. We want a long story long. This is a podcast. People are driving to work. They need to hear the details.
Right.
I need to know what are you walking up and down the streets of Panama, and there's cows in people's backyards. There's donkeys. Right. There's iguana, and you literally kind of skim by this, but you would practice your message that you were preparing to speak because you were tongue-tied and you were a stutterer.
That's correct.
In front of these animals.
That's right. And the reason I did that is I was embarrassed to be speaking in public. And everybody knew that Fermin Agustin Whittaker Archibald could not speak. It was a disaster. That's what they thought about me.
Yeah.
So he gave me 30 days to get my sermon ready, and I worked on my message and got it ready. And my dad bought me a $5 suit that Sunday morning off the street corner.
Yeah, he did.
My parents are very poor.
Yeah.
And I remember going to the pulpit and opening the Bible and saying, "In the beginning, God created Eve. And out of Eve, he took Adam." And the whole church was in the aisle laughing at me. All my friends were in the first 2 rows and they were just cracking up. "We knew you couldn't do it. We knew you couldn't do it."
Oh man.
And I realized,
so you're already spitting blasphemy. I mean, you're already messing up scripture. You're
messing up scripture, right?
Lies are coming in your head. They're trying to convince you. Oh my gosh, you can't do this.
So I opened the Bible this time and looked at my notes, and I knew what I was saying now. I said, first Adam was created and then Eve. And the sermon was to be for 20 minutes.
Uh-huh.
And in 7 minutes, I was done.
Wow.
And I finished my sermon, and I sat down, and the preacher said, "Did you see what God just did to Fermin Agustin Whittaker Archibald? He spoke for 7 minutes, and he never missed a word."
Wow.
And I haven't missed a word since that day.
Wow.
I can preach in El Salvador to 20,000 people at the Estadio Flor Blanca. Don't miss a word. But you put a camera in my face, and I say, "Talk to Carlos about this."
Well, I have obviously been able to witness the, I guess, Dad, what we would call now a miracle, since you couldn't string 3 words together back in the day, and now I don't know, I've probably heard you speak thousands and thousands of times. So you realize in 7 minutes that God has anointed you and gifted you, and that obviously, this is called Enter Wild. Sounds like a pretty wild experience, but what I love about God is that the wildness doesn't stop at the beginning. Your journey took you out of Panama, and tell us a little bit about that. You ended up leaving your homeland, and and God called you somewhere else. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, once I came off the platform, the pastor made a decision that was extremely important. He said, if God is calling you to preach, he needs to be my mentor.
Huh.
And he would take me to do visitation on weekends with senior adults in rest homes and who were not able to get to church. He would take me to the deacon's meeting on Tuesday night so I could learn what a deacon was.
Yeah, he did.
And on Wednesday night, he would take me to the prayer meeting to teach me how to lead a prayer group.
Yeah.
And this pastor was my first teacher in the area of ministry.
Okay.
His name was David Morgan. And then he went to Canada when I was about 18 years old, almost 19, finishing high school. He went to Toronto, Canada to see his son.
Okay.
And came back and said to me, you're going to Canada. I have a scholarship for you to the Toronto Baptist Seminary. And I'm going, where is that?
Wait, so you're in Central America, in Panama, on the by the ocean, sweating and humid every day, and now he wants you to go to Toronto, Canada.
Right. So we didn't have any money at all. We were broke. My dad made 14 cents an hour. We're just a very poor family.
Yeah.
But the church raised the money to buy me a plane ticket.
Wow.
And I left Panama, went to Toronto, Canada, and Carlos, I came off the plane in Miami to transfer to the flight to Toronto.
Had you ever been out of Panama?
Never in my life, except to Colombia 1 year.
Okay.
See my grandfather. 1 week I saw my grandfather in my whole life.
Yeah.
And my parents are from Colombia. They went to Panama in 1929. I came out in 1941.
Well, you came out. That's the most gentle way of saying I was birthed. But that's
I was
quite
birthed.
all right. Yes.
That's right. And when the pastor went to Canada, he came back and said, you're going to go to Canada to study. And I'm going, where is Canada?
Yeah.
He said, well, son, we will send you there because the Lord has called you. And he says, as your pastor, my responsibility is to help you start the journey.
Yeah.
And they flew me out on Pan American Airlines to Miami, came off the plane in Miami, trying to transfer. I saw an escalator for the first time in my life. And I froze, and the lady pushed me from behind and said, son, in Spanish, súbete, get on this. I'm going, I've never seen this thing before in my life. And this little old lady just pushed me on the steps, and I began to go up, and wow, this is cool. So once I got to Toronto, the plane landed, and I see this white stuff coming out around the plane. And
yeah.
I'd never seen snow in my life.
Wow.
So I stayed on the plane and just stayed waiting for it to go away. And the lady said to me, sir, you've arrived. I'm going, what's that? She said, it's snow.
That's awesome.
So I came off the plane, and the seminar or the immigration officer said, sir, your visa was rejected.
Wow.
In flight. And I'm going, oops, what do I do now? Remember, I'm just an 18-year-old kid. I don't know what's going on. And he said, call the school and we'll see what we can do.
Okay.
And the immigration officer allowed me to stay in Toronto, renewing my visa every 6 months.
Wow.
For 4 years. For
what?
4 years. We stayed there until I finished my Bachelor of Theology degree.
Uh-huh.
And then I found a way to come to the United States. And I had worked in New York City during the summertime in Poughkeepsie and Kerhonkson, next close to West Point, with migrant workers who came to New York.
So
that's where I started my preaching ministry, was in New York State.
Okay, so tell us a little bit about that. You're in New York City. It's the summers in between your school in Toronto, and you're working. What does it mean to be working with migrant workers?
These are the people who pick the oranges and the bananas and the fruits of the trees for us. These are the workers that work in the farms, on the farms in the United States.
And so what were you doing working with that? Like, what does that mean? What were you doing? Were you just...
I was a summer missionary,
okay,
for the Southern Baptist Home Mission Board.
Okay.
And they would have young adults to go to all over the nation to do ministry.
Okay.
Only for 8 weeks or 5 weeks, whatever.
Yeah.
And my assignment was to go to New York City and try to minister to the Hispanics in New York, upstate New York. And where I could make an impact was on the migrant centers. When the men came off the fields before they had dinner, we would sit down on the ground in the middle of the dirt and the junk, and I would preach to these men.
Wow. So
about Jesus Christ.
These guys are out in the fields all day. They're exhausted. Right. They get bussed back to one location where there's going to be a meal for them. And you're saying that everyone kind of sits down, and before the meal, you're able to preach.
That's correct. That is correct.
Wow.
And the interesting thing is they were from Puerto Rico and mostly from the Dominican Republic. So just like now we bring in Mexicans and other people on the East Coast, those are the guys that came in.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And that's where my preaching began.
So you began to preach to these migrant men workers, and that's when you started saying, wow, maybe this is what I'm going to be doing.
That's exactly right. Then after the second week, the sponsoring church, which was an Anglo church, decided that they want to put their pastor in the platform to preach in English.
Yeah.
And I became his interpreter.
Really?
I gave up my position for his position. Wait.
You're telling me that the white American English speaking pastor was like, you know what? I know that you speak in Spanish and you're preaching that, but I'm going to speak in English, and then you're just going to translate to Spanish.
Exactly right. And I'm going, but why should I do that? You know, I mean, I realized, no, it's not my assignment. God is in charge of my life.
Wow.
And this is a brother that's a good pastor. Let him preach the gospel, and I will interpret. And I did that.
Okay. Now,
for 7 weeks, I did that.
And this is what I love about this part of the story is, little did you know at this moment, because before you were just preaching in Spanish to these guys.
That is correct.
But little did you know that during these 7 weeks of you having to suddenly translate this pastor's English into Spanish, that God was going to be moving you to Los Angeles to where you were actually going to have to use both languages at the same time.
I did not know where Los Angeles was.
Oh.
Wow. I came to California to go to California Baptist College at the time. Yeah. They called and told me there's a church in Pico Rivera. I didn't know where Pico Rivera was. Didn't have a car. I didn't have a car. Didn't have any money for a bus. But my friend would drive me to church. He would preach for the Russians, and I would preach for the Spanish-speaking group.
Wow.
The church had a very small congregation, and they had about...
This is in Pico Rivera?
In Pico Rivera.
So the listeners know this is in East Los Angeles, correct?
Pico Rivera is part of the East 8. It's next to Whittaker. You have to cross Pico Rivera to get to Whittaker.
Okay.
Whittaker was Nixon Town.
Got it.
Pico Rivera was Mexican Town.
So Nixon Town and Mexican Town. I got it.
Yeah. And I went to a small church of 14 members and 7 deacons. And I didn't know I didn't really understand why God had put me there, you know?
Yeah.
And the church was a small church, and they were very, very poor. They could only pay me $25 a week for a good sermon and $15 for a bad sermon.
That's so good. Right.
Yeah. So while I was at church, I was preaching, and there was no one there but old people, old senior adults.
And you're what? How old are you at this point?
I was about 22 years old.
Okay. So you're preaching to a bunch of old guys.
Right. Being a senior adult, nice people.
Yeah, sorry. Seniors. I don't want to call you old. You're a senior.
No, I'm not old. I'm mature. I'm not old.
That's right. Yeah.
And I was standing there in the platform getting ready for the service, and I looked in through the window, and I realized there are no young people in the church.
Yeah.
They're in the parking lot playing soccer.
Wow. So like the parents and the grandparents are in the church, and the young people are outside.
They told me, you will only speak in Spanish. You want to speak in English, go with the gringos.
Wow.
And I'm going, what? And so I went, I saw the young people playing soccer outside, and they're not in the church. So I walked outside and said, hey guys, come to church. And the young man said to me, I can still see his name.
Yeah.
I said, but I don't speak Spanish.
Wow.
I said, but your name is Martinez. He said, no, my name is Martin, not Martinez. In the 60s, they were changing their names to be adjusting to the culture of the United States.
Wow.
And he said, no, my name is Martin. The other guy, no, my name is not Roberto. My name is Rob.
Wow.
And I realized, wait a minute, these kids don't speak Spanish. So I went back into the church and went to my office, a little hole in the wall, and got on my knees and says, Lord, I don't want to be here. Because the adults are saying, if you speak in English, go with the gringos, and our kids are going to hell.
Wow.
So the Lord said to me, go back to the podium. And I went back to the podium. I opened my Bible, and like a laser from heaven came through these words, bilingue, go bilingual. Carlos, I had never heard the word bilingual in my life.
Wow.
And I said, what? I'm on the platform. And the Lord says, I will put words in your mouth. Y empecé a hablar en dos idiomas. I began to speak in two languages, just like I'm talking to you. Estoy hablando contigo. And before I knew it, the young people began to come into church. And they raised their fingers and said, go ahead, sir.
Wow. So
and the church exploded.
Wow. And the church exploded because suddenly the seniors realized you're speaking their language, but our kids don't understand. And now you're speaking English and in Spanish in the same message, translating yourself.
That is correct. I was my interpreter. That's right. And it wasn't a long sermon. It usually was 20 minutes or 15 minutes.
Yeah.
But the Lord gave me the ability to package it to where sentence after sentence came out in two languages.
Wow.
I had never done it in my life.
Wow. So you didn't practice this. This wasn't like, you didn't go to seminary and go to the like translate yourself class?
Absolutely not. It was standing on the platform, opening my Bible, and God says, bilingue, go bilingual.
Wow. Okay, bilingue. So for the next 2 minutes, I want you to go bilingual on the podcast.
Bueno, si usted quiere, if you want, yo puedo hacer eso. I can do that.
Okay, that's what we're going to do. So suddenly it starts to explode. And tell us a little bit about what happened at Primera Iglesia in the next few years.
Bueno, la primera iglesia bautista del sur en Pico Rivera empezó a crecer. La iglesia empezó a crecer. The church began to grow. Y los jóvenes empezaron a venir a la iglesia. Young people began to come to church. Porque entendían el idioma because they understood the language.
Right.
And the church couldn't pay me enough money, so I became a substitute teacher. Yo fui maestro sustituto en la secundaria, in the secondary school.
Yeah.
And I began to make a few dollars, empecé a ganar dinero. Pero seguí hablando con los jóvenes. I was always talking to the young people.
Wow.
Acerca de Cristo. En la escuela o fuera de la escuela, in the school or outside the school.
Yeah.
I would walk with my students. Yo caminaba con mis estudiantes. Y de repente empezaron a llegar a la iglesia. They began to come to church.
Wow.
Y empezaron a decir, hermano Fermín, we love you, pastor, te amamos. And I didn't realize what God had done. No realicé lo que Dios había hecho. Un milagro en mi vida, a miracle in my life.
Yeah.
Donde pensé, I thought in two languages and I spoke in two languages.
Wow.
And to this day, I can do that, by the way, if it's necessary.
And right now, that was just, it's so funny. I've heard you do this my entire life. Yeah. Until you kind of step away from the reality and I'm just used to it, but nobody does this. Nobody, translates themselves. There's always a translator. And, I think that is absolutely wild. If we're expectant on Jesus, and if we have an expectation, God is going to do some absolutely wild and crazy things like that, Dad. That's incredible.
And Carlos, God does it all the time. We just don't acknowledge it.
Yeah. So good.
We get on the platform and look what I can do. No. The Lord teach me something years ago.
Yeah.
Trust in the Lord with all your might and do not lead on your own understanding.
Wow.
In all your ways, acknowledge Him and He will direct your path. He will guide you.
Acknowledge Him.
Acknowledge Him.
Wow.
And I recognize in the eyes of myself and my ministry, I'm just a human being that God saved at age 12 by a woman teacher in my country. And the church exploded. The church grew very well. We became one of the strongest Southern Baptist churches in California at that time. And I never talked about the size of my church. I never talked about, look, I am doing.
Yeah.
I would cross the park. I would cross the street to the park across from my church.
Yeah.
And play marbles with the children. And 3 weeks later, their parents show up at church and says, "Our kids are talking about you. Who are you?"
Wow.
And I said, "Well, I just love kids. I love people.
Yeah.
I love, I worked a lot with drug addicts in Pico Rivera.
Yeah.
And today, those people are now grandfathers in our churches.
Beautiful.
Because I believe that the calling of each one of us is to tell the story.
Yeah.
And we don't tell a good story. You do an excellent job in that area.
Well, you're my dad, so I appreciate that. And I think I get it from you because I've been absolutely hooked and fascinated at your journey, even just listening to it, knowing it, but having you kind of explain that. And there were actually things that I'd never even known, with the migrant. I didn't know about the migrant worker and the fact that you were the one preaching. I did know that you were preaching in New York to them, but I didn't know that then you had to suddenly start translating for somebody speaking in English, which is just crazy. Isn't that life? Isn't that just how life goes? Is like, God calls us to do something, we're doing it, and then somebody comes in and kind of butts us to the side, but we just have to stay faithful. And what I love about your story is you stayed faithful, and look what ended up happening. Miracles. And so thank you again from the bottom of my heart for letting me interview my own father. I'm ultimately grateful for my walk with Jesus, watching you. And I know that you've prayed for me. I think what you say that you pray for me my whole life is for double. What would we say about wisdom?
A double portion of wisdom.
A double portion of wisdom. And some days I need quadruple portions. And so, thank you for doing that. Happy anniversary. I love you so much. Thank you.
God bless you, son. Take care.
Ladies and gentlemen, Fermin Agustin Whittaker. Love you, Dad. I miss you, Dad. It's weird to say that because you're still here. That'll make sense to all of you at some point in your life. Thanks for sharing this conversation with me. Thanks for leaning a little bit deeper into the life of my father. And we'll see you next week on another episode. Talk to you guys soon.